Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., where we are covering the Space Security Conference here with none other than the man, the myth, and the legend, the chief of the space program here at CSIS, my good friend Todd Harrison. Todd, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming. It's been a great conference so far. A lot of good issues being raised.
So one of the reasons you guys are obviously holding this, there's a new administration. You guys are have an international partner, and I'll let you talk about that in a second on this conference. But what are you guys trying to accomplish, and what are some of the takeaways you want the audience to go home with?
You know, what we're focused on here is trying to raise awareness and understanding of the key space security issues facing the Trump administration. So what's on the administration's deck? What do they need to be focused on and dealing with right now? And there are plenty of things. We've gotten, good discussions going this morning. We had Vice Admiral Richard, the deputy from Stratcom, come and give our opening address. Raised a lot of great issues. We then had a panel discussion right after that. We talked about space crisis dynamics and how we need to, adjust our thinking about how deterrence applies to space, and maybe even adjust some of our space systems to be more resilient, so that it will not be as unattractive of a target for adversaries. And we also had Representative Bridenstine come in and talk, and he raised issues about space situational awareness, roles and responsibilities for that, and looking at American space launch and how we can incentivize our companies, space companies, to use American launch vehicles, a whole host of issues that we're bringing up.
And who's your international partner on this?
So we are co-hosting this with the Prague Security Studies Institute, and this is the fourth in a series of space security conferences that they've run. Two have been in Prague, one in Tokyo, and this is the first in Washington.
I want to take you to the whole militarization of space, right? I mean, there is a very passionate group who has protested that for decades, and there are some who would argue that that's exactly 7 decades too late. That really, I mean, even if you go back to Sputnik, it was not a scientific endeavor. It was a military signal to the United States, and there's always been a powerful military component to this. And there are concerns in that community, certainly, that this administration is going to be much more aggressive in terms of some of its space actions, although you can argue the last administration was pretty aggressive as well in some respects, especially in military space. What do you think some of the hottest issues are that are going to have to be debated and aired in this administration as it balances sort of a much more muscular footing with some other very real issues of, as you said, deterrence, signaling, to make sure that none of the signaling is either, goes too far or falls too short?
Yeah, so I think we've got to get a better understanding within the U.S. and among our allies and partners of what constitutes a mild provocation in space, what is an overt hostile act, and where do things fall along that spectrum. And how are we going to respond? And are we prepared to respond not just unilaterally, but as an alliance? And so, that we've got to think through a lot of these issues in advance, because when a crisis happens, we're not going to have time to figure it out on the fly.
For anybody who's been following our Defense and Aerospace Business Report, Todd is a regular Toddcaster on our program, where we've also got Byron Callan, Sash Tusa, Ron Epstein, Steve Grunman's joined us, as well as Richard Abalafia, to talk a little bit about commercial aerospace. I've got to bring budget into this. I know that
I knew you had to.
I know that budget is one of your hats here. It's one of your bigger hats, and you've got space, you've got vertical lift as well. But I got to ask you about the budget. So we did talk about that a little bit last week, but I want to sort of peel away. The Macleay's Credit Suisse conference is happening just a couple of blocks from here, and we just heard Adam Smith, the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, and one of the things that he said was, when you get the congressional pin, you don't get a magic wand, which I thought was a good one, and the second one is that we're still living on Fantasy Island. There were classic Smith lines. But his challenge was, look, the money's simply not there, and the budget's going to go up, and that he was saying that strategy, it may be smarter to have a 400,000 person army that's trained, equipped, and ready, as opposed to a 600,000 person army, which may not be any of those things. How is this, just even in the days since we had the podcast, which we taped late last week, how is this budget debate and discussion evolving?
I think it's a bifurcated debate. On the one hand, you got people talking pie in the sky. We're going to get huge budget increases, and the fact is, as we've discussed on the podcast, that's hard to do because we have budget caps in place, and under the current rules, it's going to be difficult to get that kind of an increase, especially if it's premised on cuts in the non-defense side of the budget, which you're not likely to get Democrats to support. Going forward, I think the other part of the debate is going to become of greater and greater significance, and it's more realistically constrained notion of what are we going to do with defense. I put out an op-ed last week where I made the same argument, basically, that we may be premature in growing the force. That we may, we've got a readiness crisis now, largely because we have more force structure than we can afford. Adding more force structure is just going to exacerbate the problem. The first thing we need to do with any budget increase is kind of redouble our efforts on making the force we have today ready and make sure it has the capabilities that we need for the future.
And there's a lot, and I want to use you, and I know that you've got to get back in there because he is the host of the conference after all, so that would be rude for it to start without him, or maybe limits my longevity at coming here to CSIS to interview you. But talk to us very quickly about the supplemental outlook, because this year we're looking at potentially like in an increase via supplemental because nobody's going to change the BCA. But then there are folks who are talking next year about maybe a smaller one. So talk to us a little bit about what the 17 and 18 dynamics are going to look like for the OCO, which is really what has been supporting, obviously, defense spending for the past decade.
Yeah, so you look at the FY17 supplemental request. It's $30 billion in total for defense. $25 billion is in the base budget, which requires relitigating the budget deal from 2015. $5 billion is in the OCO budget. I think it's a good barometer of what's going to happen in the future, how they handle the FY17 supplemental. Is that going to work its way through Congress? Do they get a budget deal that raises the budget caps? It looks unlikely right now. Do they end up stuffing it all into OCO, or does it end up being a lesser amount overall? I think that's going to be instructive. What happens in 2017 will be instructive for what happens in the rest of the administration.
And do we have any sense on what OCO is going to look like in 18? So it's a $54 billion increase, but
They came out last week and the skinny budget said it'll be $65 billion in OCO. So I think that actually relieved a lot of people who are worried that Mick Mulvaney, who is not exactly a fan of OCO, would try to stuff all the base budget funding from OCO back in the base budget, which would eat up a lot of the $54 billion increase.
Migration, as it's been called.
Yes, stuffing migration. But it looks like that's not going to happen in FY18. And so, going forward, we're going to continue to be reliant on the OCO budget.
I've known you for a long time. The last question. I've known you for a long time, and one of the things that you've always talked about is, what do they even spend that much money on that quickly? Can the department take such a big increase so quickly, whether which would show some more in the OCO, but certainly a lot more on the base budget? Can the department even spend that when even right now under the CR, there's readiness funding that the services give, there's personnel funding that every year the services give back, even at the amounts that they're getting now?
Yeah, so the risk now is unbalanced and unsustainable growth. I think that's a real risk. And you don't want to just be spending money on things because projects are shovel ready. The things that you can spend money fast on are not necessarily the highest priority items. So I think that's a risk if we try to rush into a buildup right now.
Todd, thanks very much. Best of luck on the rest of the conference.
Thank you.